For decades, Sally Field has been celebrated as America's sweetheart, an actress who could make audiences laugh, cry, and believe in the characters she brought to life. 2 Academy Awards, unforgettable roles, and a career that has spanned generations have made her one of Hollywood's most beloved icons. But behind the glowing spotlight and the thunder of applause lies a side of Sally few have ever seen, a side shaped not just by triumph, but by betrayal, manipulation, and rivalries that left lasting scars. Now, with the wisdom of age and nothing left to prove, Sally has pulled back the curtain on the names of 6 actors she could never forgive. These weren't fleeting disagreements or petty disputes. They were battles, some personal, some professional, that haunted her long after the cameras stopped rolling. And while a few of these names may not surprise you, one will leave you stunned. When people think of Hollywood legends, Dustin Hoffman is a name that comes up again and again. The Graduate, Rain Man, Kramer vs. Kramer. He's been celebrated for decades as one of the greatest actors of his generation, which is exactly why Sally Field's story about him stuns so many people, because her experience with Hoffman wasn't inspiring, it was humiliating. In the early 1980s, Sally walked into what should have been an exciting opportunity, a chemistry read for a new project. She'd already proven herself with 2 Emmys, and she was ready to take on another challenge. But instead of a supportive room, she found herself face to face with Hoffman, a man who made it clear he had already decided how the audition would go. Before she even began, he dominated the atmosphere. He joked with the producers, made sharp remarks about the script, and commanded every ounce of attention. When Sally finally started her reading, he didn't listen. He interrupted again and again, correcting her delivery, critiquing her choices, questioning her interpretation of the character in front of everyone. For Sally, it wasn't just embarrassing, it was crushing. It felt like auditioning for a man who had already decided I wasn't enough, she admitted years later. In that moment, she wasn't the 2-time Emmy-winning actress who had proven herself on stage and screen. She was made to feel small, like a schoolgirl fumbling through lines. The worst sting came days later. Through a mutual contact, she heard Hoffman had bragged about what happened. He reportedly said the chemistry wasn't there, and that he'd made sure of it. To Sally, it wasn't just unprofessional, it was cruel. She carried that memory with her for years, calling it one of the most humiliating moments of her professional life. But in time, she gained clarity. The problem had never been her. It had been his arrogance, his need to control, his desire to prove he was the smartest man in the room, even if it meant stepping on someone else. And though the experience wounded her, it also gave her a vow. Never again would she let someone else's ego convince her she wasn't enough. But Dustin Hoffman wasn't the only man who left scars. Sally's most devastating heartbreak came not in a casting room, but in her own home, at the hands of someone the world thought she loved. To the outside world, Sally Field and Burt Reynolds were the golden couple of the late 1970s. Their chemistry in Smokey and the Bandit was electric, playful, irresistible. Magazine covers, red carpets, interviews, they were Hollywood's perfect love story. But behind that dazzling facade, Sally was living through something much darker. In her memoir, she revealed the truth. Burt wasn't the charming partner fans believed he was. He was controlling. He wanted dominance. And when Sally's star power threatened to match his, he made sure to remind her who held the spotlight. He belittled her intelligence, mocked her appearance, and chipped away at her acting ability with subtle but brutal remarks. Publicly, he offered compliments wrapped in barbs. Privately, he cut deeper. Sally described how he silenced her, interrupted her mid-sentence, and overruled her decisions both professionally and personally. He wanted her present but voiceless, smiling at his side, never daring to outshine him. The manipulation ran deeper still. One moment he'd be affectionate and warm, drawing her in with the charisma the world adored. The next he'd withhold love, turning cold and distant. Sally admitted the cycle eroded her sense of self, leaving her invisible even when the cameras flashed and the crowd cheered. "I never felt truly seen," she later confessed. "I was there, but not me, not the full me." Despite the years they spent together, she was never sure who the real Burt Reynolds was. The man the public worshipped was not the man she came home to at night, and though she tried to love him, gave him patience and fought to make it work, he broke her in ways the audience would never see. To the world, Burt was the bandit, but to Sally, he was heartbreak in disguise. And if heartbreak in love was devastating, heartbreak on set could be just as destructive. Her next clash wasn't with a romantic partner, It was with a man whose chaos swallowed entire productions. If Burt Reynolds left Sally feeling invisible, Robert Blake left her feeling trapped in a storm. On the set of Say Goodbye, Maggie Cole, she came in prepared for a demanding role, ready to pour herself into the work. But instead of collaboration, she faced one of the most volatile personalities she had ever encountered. Blake wasn't just unpredictable, he was disruptive. He changed lines without warning, ignored the script mid-scene, and sabotaged carefully planned takes with random outbursts of behavior no one had rehearsed. To him, it might have felt like artistic spontaneity. To Sally, it was pure chaos. And the chaos spread. Crew members whispered about his mood swings. One day he was calm and focused. The next he was shouting at a technician or storming off set over something trivial. The tension infected everyone. What should have been a creative space became a battlefield of nerves. Sally, ever the professional, tried to keep things afloat. She played peacekeeper, working overtime just to hold the production together. But no one could contain Blake's unpredictability. Eventually, the cracks became too deep. The film collapsed, shelved before it ever reached the public. A casualty of dysfunction that spiraled out of control. For most actors, that kind of professional setback would have been frustrating. For Sally, it was deeper. It was traumatic. There are actors who act, she later said, and there are actors who make everyone else small so they can feel big. Blake was the second kind. Those words carried weight, because they came from a woman who had endured the worst of it. She left that set with a vow. Never again would she let chaos masquerade as genius. But if Robert Blake was a storm of noise and unpredictability, Sally's next clash couldn't have been more different. Instead of chaos, it was cold silence, and it left her just as shaken. After enduring the storm of Robert Blake, Sally Field hoped Back Roads would be different. The script was raw and layered, the kind of project that could dig into human vulnerability. She walked onto set ready to collaborate, to build something meaningful. But instead of connection, she ran into a wall named Tommy Lee Jones. From the very first day, Jones was distant. He didn't just keep to himself, he shut her out entirely. No small talk during breaks, no discussion of character motivations, no warmth at all. He arrived, delivered his lines and left, treating the process like an obligation rather than an art. For Sally, whose strength as an actress came from emotional connection, it was devastating. She tried to break through the ice, asking questions, cracking light jokes, even gently probing about their character's relationship. But Jones wouldn't engage. Sometimes he didn't even look at her. That distance wasn't just frustrating, it was damaging. Critics later noted the film lacked chemistry between its leads. What they didn't know was that the lack of chemistry wasn't in the script. It was in the silence between takes, the absence of human connection that Jones refused to give. "We were supposed to play two broken people learning to love," Sally once reflected, "but I was playing alone." She remained professional, never lashing out, but the experience left her drained. For an actress who thrived on collaboration, Back Roads felt like sabotage, not through shouting or conflict, but through cold indifference. And though she never worked with Tommy Lee Jones again, the memory of that ice remained. If Blake was chaos, Jones was the freeze that followed. Both left scars, but in different ways. And not all her battles were with men. Sometimes the hardest clashes came from women who weren't there to build a story, but to dominate it. When audiences watched Steel Magnolias, they saw magic. The cast was stacked with Hollywood icons, the story was heartfelt, and Sally Field's performance as Malin remains one of the most unforgettable of her career. On screen, the chemistry looked seamless, but behind the curtain things were very different, especially between Sally and Shirley MacLaine. From the moment filming began, tension simmered. Sally approached the role with quiet intensity. She wanted emotional truth, raw vulnerability, and respect for the grief her character carried. Shirley, however, walked onto set like it was a battlefield. Every scene was a power struggle, every line a chance to assert herself. Crew members whispered that Shirley constantly reminded people of her Oscar wins, brushed off the director's notes, and injected herself into moments that weren't hers to take. Sally stayed professional, but she felt the pressure. What should have been a collaboration turned into a tug-of-war. One emotional scene became infamous. It took 17 takes, not because Sally couldn't deliver, but because Shirley kept derailing it with sarcastic quips. What was supposed to be raw grief kept turning into unintended comedy, and Sally's patience was pushed to the breaking point. Publicly, Sally never trashed her co-star. She smiled through the chaos and gave the performance the world still praises today. But years later, when asked about Shirley, she was blunt without being bitter. Shirley carried a storm wherever she went. It wasn't just a clash of styles. It was a clash of egos. Sally wanted to serve the story. Shirley wanted to dominate the room. And while audiences wept over Melin's monologue, Sally knew the real pain was the one no one saw, the frustration of fighting battles that had nothing to do with the script. But if Shirley drained her through rivalry, the final name on Sally's list cut even deeper. This man didn't just challenge her artistry, he tried to dismantle her confidence piece by piece. By the time Sally Field agreed to star in Kiss Me Goodbye, she thought the project would be a breath of fresh air, a romantic comedy, light and playful, something far removed from the heavy dramas she had become known for. But instead of laughter, Sally found herself in the middle of a psychological battle, and at the center of it was James Woods. Woods was sharp, intense, and undeniably talented. But he wielded that talent like a weapon. On set, he constantly pushed back against the script, rewriting lines on the spot without warning. He questioned the director in front of the crew. He even interrupted Sally during takes to critique her performance in real time. What should have been a collaborative process turned into an exhausting test of endurance. Sally described him later as intellectually intimidating. He had a way of using words not to connect but to dominate. He would casually tell her she wasn't giving enough, that her heart wasn't in it. To the outside world, those might have sounded like critiques. But to Sally, they were daggers, meant not to push her higher, but to make her doubt herself. For an actress who had spent her career carving out respect in a male-dominated industry, it was one of the deepest cuts. It wasn't the role that wore me down, she later said. It was having to constantly defend my worth. That experience left her with more than exhaustion. It left her transformed. From that set onward, Sally made herself a quiet vow. Never again would she allow arrogance disguised as brilliance to silence her voice. And with Woods, the list was complete. 6 names, 6 battles, 6 wounds that shaped the woman Hollywood thought they knew. For the public, Sally Field will always be remembered as the radiant star who gave us unforgettable performances. Norma Rae, Places in the Heart, Steel Magnolias. But the story behind that career is something very different. It's the story of a woman who endured arrogance, manipulation, coldness, and chaos, and still rose above it all. 6 names shaped her battles. Burt Reynolds, the man who broke her heart while the world cheered their romance. Tommy Lee Jones, whose icy silence turned connection into isolation. Robert Blake, who drowned sets in chaos. Shirley MacLaine, whose ego turned artistry into rivalry. James Woods, who chipped away at her confidence with psychological games. And Dustin Hoffman, who humiliated her before she even had a chance to prove herself. Each left their mark, but none of them defined her. Because what makes Sally Field extraordinary isn't just the awards on her shelf, it's the resilience behind them. Time and again, she was pushed down, silenced, and underestimated. And every single time she stood back up, she refused to be broken. Now, at 78, Sally has nothing left to prove. She has lived the victories, survived the scars, and spoken her truth at last. Hollywood gave her fame, but it also gave her wounds. And in the end, her greatest role wasn't one written in a script. It was becoming the woman who carried all of it and still stood tall. So the next time you see Sally Field on screen, remember this. Behind that smile is a survivor. Behind those tears is strength. And behind her legacy is a story far more powerful than any movie could ever capture.